Remember when you were a kid and in the doctor's waiting room, there were these magazines, and one of the games inside the magazines was that you had to find the difference in one of a bunch of similar looking figures. Like, for example, here are, what do I have? 9 different Jokers, and one of them is a little different. Now, it's not terribly difficult to see which one is different here if you watched while they appeared. This one has a tiny little spot right there on his shirt that's different than all the others. So we've been able to identify it, but you can see they're very, 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 very similar. Well, the same thing is true about GRUB and GRUB2, which of course is the next iteration of GRUB. Now, GRUB stands for Grand Unified Bootloader, but really it's just the way that the computer transitions from BIOS or UEFI booting up conditions into the actual operating system itself. It's what tells the computer, okay, where's my partitions and stuff like that. It's very easy to confuse which is which on your system, which seems silly, but it can be very, very embarrassing when you sit down at a system and you're like, okay, so is this running GRUB or GRUB2? Because they do the same thing, right? They both boot the computer, but they do have some minor nuanced differences. GRUB, of course, is older. You probably guessed that by it not having a 2 at the end of its name. But GRUB is often called GRUB Legacy because it is older, but it's still on a few operating systems. Not many, but a few. I think Slackware still uses GRUB Legacy. Now, the biggest and easiest way to figure out if you're dealing with GRUB or GRUB2 on your system is to look inside the boot GRUB folder. And if you see menu.lst or grub.conf, that means you're running GRUB Legacy because GRUB2 does not have those configuration files. GRUB2 has this configuration file, grub.cfg. Now, it's easy to confuse .cfg and .conf, so I always just look for menu.lst. If that exists, you're on GRUB Legacy. Now, the thing about GRUB is it's kind of difficult to modify. It's very easy for automated systems, like when you install a new kernel, to figure out how to update the menu and update the boot code, but it's really difficult for the end user to modify that stuff. And the boot menu, usually when it's booting up, it says, press something in 10 seconds in order to change the way it boots. So this usually just appears for you and you can see it. Now, GRUB2 is a lot more customizable. In fact, if you go into the etc. default GRUB file, this is a configuration file that's easy to read, and it's going to allow you to change the way that it looks when it boots up. Now, GRUB2 also has a ton of other cool features. It can boot from an ISO file, from a USB disk. It can name, or it can identify hard drives based on their UUID or their device, like DevSDA. So it's a lot more advanced than GRUB1. But one of the advancements that's also a frustration is that boot menu that I talked about that comes up with GRUB. It's hidden with GRUB2, so it just goes right to the login screen. You never see anything from GRUB2. And if you don't know this little trick, it can be a real bugger to get into that menu if you want to change something during boot. So be sure to just hold down the shift key when the computer is booting up, and then boom, all of a sudden you're going to get into the GRUB2 interactive menu that you can change boot code things on the fly. It's really, really cool. I'll show you what I mean, but it's not difficult once you know if you have GRUB or GRUB2, which allows you to do a lot more configuration stuff. Now, I'm here on an Ubuntu system. This has GRUB2, and if we were to look at, let's just look at it, etc. default GRUB, we're going to see this is just a configuration file. We can change these things. Once you make a change, you do have to do sudo update GRUB. When you do that, it's going to update the boot code inside the boot folder. And if we look in that boot folder, so go into boot, GRUB, type ls. Well, look at that, grub.cfg, there's no menu.lst, so we know that this is GRUB2. So that's how you manage things in GRUB2. I'll show you really quickly before we end. This is a computer that's turned off. If I start this computer and hold down the shift key, as long as I hold down the shift key, boom, we get this menu. But if I don't hold that, we don't see any menu for us to interact with GRUB at all. Now, figuring out if you have GRUB or GRUB2 can be a little bit challenging if you don't know that simple trick to look for menu.lst. But they both do the same thing. They tell the computer how to boot up and how to mount its different partitions. It's just that GRUB2 is definitely an advancement. It's more configurable, it does more things, and it's easier for the end user to manage. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.